nominally in the majority, vote against the National Defense Authorization Act? The answer is pretty startling. The National Defense Authorization Act is important to make sure that we are protecting the national security and the safety of the American people, ensuring our military readiness in a very dangerous world, and providing a 5% well-deserved and well-earned pay raise for our military servicemen and women. Why would so many House Republicans oppose the National Defense Authorization Act when they are in the majority nominally for the moment? It is because we were able to successfully remove efforts by extreme MAGA Republicans to further criminalize abortion care and stop military service women from receiving the support necessary to seek reproductive health care in other states when they are stationed in places like Texas. On this week of all weeks, when we've seen the cruelty of right-wing extremists unfold in terms of reproductive freedom in Texas before the entire world, clearly necessitating the need to ensure that military women who have no choice other than to serve when assigned to places like Texas have the opportunity when necessary to make their own reproductive health care decisions and travel to other states. On this week of all weeks, you have so many House Republicans oppose the National Defense Authorization Act and a pay raise for our military because they were unsuccessful in marching America toward a nationwide abortion ban, and they wanted to start with military service women and military families. It's shameful. But that's the reality that we confront. And we're going to continue to point out the contrast between House Democrats, Team Reasonable, Team Normal, Team Get Stuff Done, and Team Extreme. Questions?
Sir, obviously House Republicans are going to move forward with trying to hold Hunter Biden in contempt. House Democrats, not too long ago, held Dan Scavino and Peter Navarro in contempt. Don't you think that should apply to Hunter Biden?
What should apply to the extreme MAGA Republican shrinking and fading majority is the standard set by House Democrats, led by Speaker Pelosi, in partnership with Senate Democrats and President Biden in the last Congress, which is to actually deliver for the American people. In the last Congress, one of the most productive in American history, we were able to rescue the economy from the COVID-19 pandemic. We were able to put shots in arms, money in pockets, kids back in school. We were able to pass the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to create millions of good-paying jobs. And we see infrastructure projects underway all across America. We were able to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act in order to enact gun safety legislation for the first time in 30 years that will save lives, and we need to do more. We were able to stand up for our veterans who are suffering from exposure to toxic substances, burn pits, or Agent Orange, and give them the health care that they need. We were able to pass the CHIPS and Science Act to bring domestic manufacturing jobs back home to the United States of America. And we were able to pass the Inflation Reduction Act to strike a dramatic blow against the climate crisis and lower prescription drug prices, including dropping the price of insulin to $35 per hour. That is the standard that House Democrats, in partnership with President Biden and Senate Democrats, set in the last Congress. This do-nothing Republican Congress right now is the least productive in modern American history. They are focused on investigating the president, impeaching Joe Biden at the direction of the puppet master in chief, Donald Trump, censuring Democrats over and over and over again, bringing non-binding resolutions to the floor because they have no affirmative legislative agenda. Perhaps that's a good thing, because if they actually were effective in accomplishing their objectives, they would slash Social Security, cut Medicare, end democracy as we know it, and continue to march us toward a nationwide abortion ban. Democrats are standing in the way.
But can you talk about, I'm sorry, just really quickly, you didn't really answer the question. Isn't this, I mean, some people would say it's a double standard. So if this hits the House floor, are you voting no on contempt? I mean,
That would be correct.
Isn't it
That would be
a double
correct.
standard then?
Yeah. Listen, the so-called investigation underway by House Republicans is a joke. It's embarrassing. There is no evidence that President Biden broke the law. This is an impeachment inquiry of the president. You can't impeach the president's son. There is no evidence that President Joe Biden broke the law. There's no evidence that President Joe Biden committed an impeachable offense. There is no evidence that President Biden engaged in any wrongdoing. This has been an ongoing investigation, understand, from the very beginning on January 3rd, when they couldn't get their act together, 15 different dysfunctional votes before they caved to the extremists. From the very beginning of this Congress, they've been after President Joe Biden, and they want to try to get to him in any way possible, including targeting President Biden's family. No evidence in January, no evidence in February, no evidence in March, no evidence in April, no evidence in May, no evidence in June, no evidence in July, no evidence in August, no evidence in September, no evidence in October, no evidence in November, no evidence in December. And they're still at it. This is an epic fail. Don't ask me, ask Chuck Grassley.
Can you talk about what your sense is of these ongoing conversations about immigration, this end-of-year supplemental? I mean, based on what we're hearing, things like parole and changes to asylum, those are very much on the table. Is that something that you think is in line with where your caucus is?
It's been our view that we have to get the national security supplemental funding request over the finish line, and that it is irresponsible that extreme MAGA Republicans, who are bending the knee to the pro-Putin caucus that is growing in intensity amongst Republicans in the House and in the Senate, have irresponsibly injected other items, albeit we understand the need to address the situation at the border, but nonetheless have injected other items into this discussion, complicating our ability to provide for America's national security. That said, this is an irresponsible group of people, and we've dealt with this throughout the entirety of this do-nothing Republican Congress, and so there are ongoing discussions. Our view in the House is that whatever agreement is arrived at tentatively, when it's time for us to evaluate it, it has to be consistent with two principles. One, America is a nation of immigrants that gives us a competitive advantage over China and everyone else. And two, we are a nation anchored in the rule of law. If whatever comes over from the Senate is anchored in those two principles, or is at least not inconsistent with those two principles, then I think we'll be able to evaluate it in good faith, and every individual member would have to make decisions. We'll go over to this side. Yeah, thanks.
Catherine Swartz with Notice. I'm wondering about the future of Ukraine funding beyond this bill into 2024. Growing number of Republicans have expressed doubt over funding for Ukraine. What do you see as the long-term future for Congress in terms of funding this war?
This is what confuses me, because when I was growing up, I was told that Republicans were the party of national security. That was the case apparently under Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. It clearly is no longer the case, as evidenced by the fact that so many Republicans today voted against pay raises for our military and the National Defense Authorization Act. The fact that Republicans have been taken over by the extremists and the traditional national security Republicans are on the run is evidenced by the Republican resistance to supporting the war effort in Ukraine. It doesn't take a rocket scientist, if you are serving in Congress, immersed in these national security issues, to understand that if we allow Vladimir Putin to run through Ukraine, that his next target will be a NATO country, which means that American military men and women will be in the fight. Not just our resources, American military men and women risking their lives consistent with our NATO obligations. My Republican colleagues have suggested that they don't have any clarity on the plan moving forward or the successes of Ukraine. The Ukrainian women and men have been incredibly courageous, incredibly brave, incredibly effective in pushing back against the Russian military and Vladimir Putin's aggression. Heading into this conflict, all of the prognosticators, including very sophisticated ones, were telling the world in February of 2022 that Russia's military was going to wipe out Ukraine and be in Kyiv in about a week. We are now approximately 22 months into this conflict, and here's what we know about Ukraine's success. Ukraine has captured 50% of the territory once held by Russia. It's now been recaptured by Ukraine. They have pushed back the Russian military, which, by the way, heading into this conflict was the fiercest, we believed, military in Europe. Stronger than Germany, stronger than Great Britain, stronger than France. The bravery of the Ukrainian military, with support from the United States against great odds, has resulted in more than 300,000 casualties being inflicted on the Russian military. 300,000 in less than 2 years. More than half the Russian military has been wiped out. That's in America's national security interests, because we're a democracy. We push back against authoritarian dictators who threaten peace and stability in the world. And so it's just not clear to any of us who understand these dynamics how our Republican colleagues can push back against wanting to fund the Ukrainian war effort in America's national security interests. The reason they are doing so, in my humble opinion, is that there is a pro-Putin caucus that has increasingly taken over the Republican Party. Here in the Congress, the pro-Putin caucus is led by Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Outside of the Congress, the pro-Putin caucus in the Republican Party is led by Donald Trump and Tucker Carlson. They are undermining America's national security in order to elevate Vladimir Putin. That's shameful.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. When you all come back from holiday, there are going to be some appropriations deadlines coming down the pipe. There's some concerns about a full-year CR or a government shutdown. I'm curious how you all are approaching getting Dr. Caucus. And if you can explain to the American people why a full-year CR or obviously a government shutdown is not ideal, I'd appreciate it.
Well, our view is that we do have top-line spending numbers sufficient to begin the appropriations process that are connected with the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act and the global agreement that was reached in May of 2023. The top-line spending number is not a mystery to anyone. It is 1659. That is the number that is necessary for us to proceed in a manner consistent with meeting the needs of the American people in terms of their health, their safety, and their economic well-being. The problem is that while House Democrats agree with Senate Democrats on that number, and House and Senate Democrats agree with Senate Republicans on that number, and all of us agree with the Biden administration on that number, the extreme MAGA Republicans remain on an island, trying to break the agreement that they themselves negotiated. It's a non-starter. It's not happening. And if extreme MAGA Republicans continue to refuse to keep the agreement related to the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act, they are marching America to a government shutdown.
Yesterday, there were a number of members of the Hispanic caucus who lined up in opposition potentially to a border deal. Have you spoken at all with the leaders of the Hispanic caucus about this?
I speak to a variety of different members, including leaders of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus regularly, but I'm not in a position to comment on any potential agreement in the absence of being able to actually review the substance of what a border proposal looks like in the Senate.
So, this week, the Wizards and Capitals look to be finding a new home in Virginia. Some Republicans are saying that crime is a key factor in this decision. Do you think the American people are weary on Democrats when it comes to the issue of crime?
Well, first of all, I'm a long-suffering Jets fan, so I haven't really been able to follow the goings and comings of the Wizards and the Capitals. However, I think that public safety post-pandemic is moving in the right direction. Certainly in the city of New York, we've seen that homicides are down and shootings are down. That is a good thing. And New York has been restored as the safest big city in the world. I think that you would have to talk to the owner of the Capitals and Wizards to figure out the reason for their move, but it's very likely that it has nothing to do with public safety concerns and everything to do with economics.
If I could just move to New York, New York 3 GOP Nassau just announced Mazi Pilip as the contender against Swazi. Can you talk about how the coordinated campaign is going to address this and how they're going to work this campaign?
Well, you know, under the Capitol Dome, I'm not really in a position to be able to comment in any significant way, other than to say that I think that Tom Swazi is going to be able to articulate a way forward in terms of putting people over politics and serving the people of Nassau County and Queens. But it's the Swazi campaign and the candidate who are going to have to prosecute this case. And I expect that he'll do it projecting partisanship as a problem that has poisoned the do-nothing Republican Congress and offering a different way to solve problems on behalf of the people that he hopes to represent. Thanks.
Leader Jeffries, you and your Democratic colleagues were out on the Capitol steps earlier today, looking back at Sandy Hook 11 years ago, talked about the need for gun violence prevention legislation to come through, yet it's another year that goes by that not much has been done on that front. Considering the fact that there are other items that you and your Democratic colleagues have brought up as a major concern, talk to me about the frustration of not getting this gun prevention legislation through, but some of the other major ticket items that you wanted to get through, but you weren't able to before the end of the year because of Republicans in Congress.
Well, the do-nothing Republican Congress has focused on the wrong priorities from the very beginning. And that's unfortunate because House Democrats have made clear that we are ready and willing and able at any point, at any time, to work on bipartisan solutions for the American people. We've seen repeated efforts by MAGA extremists to jam their right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people in a manner that's inconsistent with meeting the needs of hardworking American taxpayers. The failure to act in any way to address the gun violence epidemic when there are more than 600 mass shootings in the country this year. More than 40,000 Americans have lost their lives, and gun violence is the leading cause of death for the children in America. That should shock the conscience of everyone and demand action with the fierce urgency of now. But MAGA extremists are driven by their ideology, it appears, as opposed to doing the right thing for the American people. House Democrats are going to continue to push hard, using every vehicle available to us to solve the gun violence epidemic and address other issues of concern.
Do you think at this point it's only going to change once Democrats are in control of the House?
Well, that's a decision that the American people are going to have to make if we find ourselves in that situation in November. Thanks.
Just two quick questions. One on the appropriations. Is it fair to say you all are not close yet on that top line number, especially since it seems like you said, House Dems, Senate, Republicans and Democrats are in agreement to what's into law. So what more can you do to get Johnson to agree to that number?
It's fair to say that we are either going to agree to keep the agreement that had been reached in terms of the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act with a top-line spending number at 1659, or the extreme MAGA Republicans in the House are going to shut down the government, which will hurt the American people.
And then if I can also ask, today is Kevin McCarthy's last day. He just gave a speech on the floor about an hour ago. You all worked together, got along as best as you could. Do you have any parting last words for him? Have you all been able to speak since he was absent a couple months ago?
We have been in communication, but I will say that we had a very positive working relationship. It was candid. We agreed to disagree without being disagreeable, and I wish him nothing but the best. Last question.
Leader, with the recent uptick in anti-Semitism, places of worship have been attacked, things like that. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is asking Democrats' position on that.
Yeah, well, President Biden has set forth over 100 different steps that can be taken, both in terms of appropriations as well as legislative action, to deal with the deeply disturbing rise in anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred in the United States of America. One of the things that we need to do is provide additional security grants to make sure that synagogues and churches and mosques and other places and houses of worship can secure themselves in this climate of increasing hatred, and it's something that I believe House Democrats are prepared to support when we see an actual legislative proposal.
Do you think you'll see it at the beginning of next year?
Certainly, we will work to make sure that we can provide the additional resources necessary to ensure that every single American feels safe in a synagogue, in a shul, in a temple, or in a house of worship. Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Leader.
Credit.